All right, Mr. Chair, I think we have everyone. We can just run through the agenda real quick.
Sounds good. Let's do it, Josh.
So tonight, item number one, we have been deferring for a bit. We do recommend another deferral to October 9th. There is some movement on this project. We've been working with the applicant and ACHD towards a solution to the issue. So we do anticipate, I mean, fingers crossed, we could hear this in October, but there has been some movement on it. So again, number one, defer to date specific October 9th, the next meeting. Item number two, another one that has been deferred for a while. This one has a little bit of a different recommendation than you may have seen before. Our recommendation would be to not accept the request for deferral. So what that ultimately means is that we will remove it from the agenda moving forward. We will put the applicant on notice that they have a time period to submit new materials for consideration. As of yet, they've been fairly unresponsive. We haven't received those new materials. We'll give them notice that they have a time period to give us new materials. At the end of that time period, we could consider the application withdrawn. So that's our recommendation on number two. Item number three, we have received new materials and we will hear that application tonight. And item number four, we will plan on hearing that as well. I believe we may have some members of the public wanting to speak on that. So with that, we'll get started here in about 15 minutes or so.
Good. Thanks. Any questions for Josh?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Josh, on item one, is the difference between one and two that one has just, they're continuing to work with staff and move the project along?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, they are working towards a solution. Yep.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to call the September 11th, 2024 Design Review Commission meeting to order. Christina, will you please call the roll?
Simple. Marsh,
Aye. Here.
Aguilar,
Here.
Zuckerman,
Here.
Erstad,
Here.
Bull,
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thank you. Next, I want to take looking for a motion on the August 14th, 2024 work session and the regular Design Review Commission meeting minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I move to approve I just lost the date that you just said.
August 14th.
Thank you. The
Yes.
August 14th minutes from the work session and our commission meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Boyle. Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Christina, you please call the roll?
Marsh,
Yes.
Aguilar,
Yes.
Zuckerman,
Yes.
Erstad,
Yes, but I'm not sure if I was there or not. So if I wasn't there, then I'll abstain.
were you online? I think you were
I
online.
might have been.
Yeah.
I
Well,
had COVID. I don't remember very well.
Bull,
Yes.
Good excuse.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. There are 2 items up for deferral tonight. The first item to be considered for a deferral is item number 1. It's DRH 23-00391. It's been deferred from the August 14th, 2024 date. Location 6614 West State Street. It's for the construction of a new car wash building with associated site improvements on a property in a C2D zone. And this would get deferred to the October 9th, 2024 hearing. Is there any member of the audience wishing to speak to this item who cannot make the October 9th, 2024 hearing? Seeing none in person, any online, Josh? No. Okay, at this time, I would take a motion on the first item for deferral.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Boyd.
I move to approve the applicant's request to defer item DRH 23-003391 to the October 9th hearing.
Okay, so moved
Second.
and seconded. Thank you, Mr. Stad, any discussion on the first item for deferral? Hearing none, Christina, will you please call the roll?
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Erstad,
Aye.
Bull,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Great. Second item considered for deferral is item number 2. It's DRH 24-00037. The location is 3150 West Main Street. It's for the construction of a new 8-story mixed-use building with retail, educational, and office uses on a property in an M5 or MX5 zone. There's a staff recommendation to reject the applicant's request for deferral. And at this time, Josh, can you provide some insight on this recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So our recommendation is to not accept the request for deferral to a date specific. What we will do is we will essentially defer the item indefinitely. It will be pulled from the agenda and it can be placed back on the agenda when and if we receive some updated information on the application. We have not at this point received revised drawings as requested. It will remain an active application. It can be placed back on the agenda. There will be a prescribed amount of time that if we don't receive a response, it will be considered officially withdrawn. Is kind of where we're going with this.
Understood. Thanks, Josh. Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Stead.
what is that duration?
It's at least 90 days and then maybe 120, but I'm gonna say 90 to be safe.
Other questions?
No, but Mr. Chair, I will be
Yes.
recusing myself from this.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stead. At this moment, I'd be open for motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Moore.
I move to reject applicant's request to defer item DRH 24-00037.
So moved
Second?
and seconded. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Christina, will you please call the roll?
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Bull,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Great. Next item to be heard tonight is item number 3 on our regular schedule. It's DRH 24-00118. And at this time, I would turn it over to Caitlin for presentation.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Before you is DRH 24-00118 at 3600 West Americana Terrace. This project was deferred by the Commission at the June 12th hearing for some requested design modifications. As you'll recall, the site is located at the west terminus of Americana Terrace, west of Americana Boulevard, and south of the Boise River and Greenbelt. There have not been any changes to the site layout. The applicant has provided design updates in response to the Commission's comments at the June 12th hearing. The application of the materials on the building and the roof elements have both been updated. And the applicant has brought some material samples rather than a board so that they can pass them around to you during their presentation. I will let the applicant team walk you through all the updates, but high-level overview, this is the northeast building, building 1. And on the top, we have the revised north elevation, which faces the Greenbelt. And below is the previous north elevation. And you can see that the application of materials is more intentional. The building elements appear more cohesive, and the roof elements better relate to the building forms. And here at the top of this slide is the revised north elevation for building 2, the northwest building, also facing the Greenbelt. And then below is that previous design. So the planning team believes the applicant has successfully updated the building design in response to the Commission's feedback, and we recommend approval with conditions. And the applicant team is available to present their project.
Thank you, Caitlin. Question for staff at the moment before the applicant comes forward? No, thank you. If the applicant could come forward, please. And if you would state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Good evening. For the record, it's Shellen Rodriguez with SMR Development, 520 West Idaho Street here in Boise, Idaho. So thank you, Caitlin and the Commission for having us back. As you mentioned, we last were here in June, and I think we had a really good project then. And I think we heard a lot of comments that we had to wade through, but hopefully we have a better project here tonight for your review. I think I'll turn it over to Chris here in a few slides to go into more detail about what Caitlin showed with the different elevations and the changes that have been made. Next slide, please. Obviously same location, same site plan. We talked through all this. It's a design review major. The project's known as Trappers Island. Next slide. It's all in the staff report, very thoroughly done. I wanted to continue to show you these slides, which haven't changed since the last presentation that we did, just obviously the existing conditions. Because in my next slide, I'll speak a little bit more towards them. And I think that I was remiss to not speak to the history of the site at the last time we met. But as you can see in the top left corner, the site is that vacant space in the middle, and it really is surrounded by water and by roads. It's very much, it's not an actual island, but it very much feels like an island, how it is surrounded by the river, Boise River, the Greenbelt, Settlers Irrigation Ditch, as well as the Trestle Bridge, and then basically the development that's just off of Americana. So I just wanted to keep that in mind as we went forward with tonight's discussion, as well as going to the next slide, please. So I'm afraid this doesn't show up super great for those in the room, or maybe perhaps for those online. I apologize for that. But at the end of the day, this local developer, Doug Jao, who is here today for any questions if needed, as well as POS Architecture local as well, have spent a lot of time both on this version of the site as well as previous versions of the site, trying to understand the history and the why and what the goals are here. So at the end of the day, Trappers Island is a name that invokes not only the physical geography of the island, but also the history of the region. They worked with the Idaho Historical Society, learned a lot about, and this was sort of before my time, but learned a lot about the role that trappers played here prior to even Lewis and Clark, the economic stimulus that the fur trading business provided to this region, and thus that historical past created the name Trappers Island. The architecture, therefore, as we talked about a few months ago, is really trying to meld an urban sophistication with the natural environment that exists, and then paying homage to the history and the natural environment here. As well as obviously the flow of the water that surrounds it on two to three major sides. So that mountain modern aesthetic, which we talked about back in June, although perhaps not everyone's favorite, is certainly the design team's intent here to sort of create resort styled amenities at a higher end luxury condominium project. Same number of units, no major changes in the site plan as Caitlin explained. But I did want to give you that history just so that you know there was thought put in it back over the last few years, based on the actual location of the site. So with that said, we can go to the next slide. I guess we'll go ahead and do the entire presentation, and then we can stand for questions. But with this, we'll get into a little bit more of the details and the revisions that we've made. So I'll call up Chris from POS Architecture for.
Thanks, Chris. If you would just state your name and address for
Yes,
record.
Chris Dwyer, 911 West Jefferson, Boise. So yeah, again, just kind of reiterate, it was great hearing the comments last June. We as a team took a step back, reevaluated all the buildings and how we were treating them, looked for inspiration back to nature. This slide starts with our building materials. We've removed a complete material, which was a different color of the block material that we were using in an effort to make make the facades less busy and just kind of bring a little more simplification and visual calmness to the building. These are all quite large buildings, so we completely repainted them, if you will, with the different materials in an effort to, study it, simplify it. All of our materials are inspired by nature, whether it's trees and some of the native vegetation inspiring the green box rib metal siding. We looked to the inspiration of the river and the flowing river, which I'll get into some diagrams on the next slide, but our block material was inspired by heavier base. You know, rivers typically have a heavier base of rocks, heavy sediment. And then we studied shadow through the trees. There's a lot of trees all around this site. And so some of our screening for our parking garages and our decks, we took inspiration from, you know, shadows and the transparency of shadows. Next slide. So some of the diagrams that we were looking at, again, going kind of back to the river, it's always moving, it's flowing, starting from how I kind of abstracted how rivers carve into our landscape. The soft sediment's kind of taken away, rivers flow into it, the heavier, more permanent sediment remains. I look at the two base levels as being pretty heavy, again, harkening back to the riverbeds. And then the unit levels up above, which are really carved out throughout every building in an effort to, you know, create interesting floor plans, privatize views for the owners, create interesting amenity spaces. And then one of the big things that we heard is how we treated the roof line. And so we took inspiration from the top layer of the river flowing up and down, and our roof lines now have a lot of undulation, visual interest in our opinion, and kind of try to set the building in motion visually. Next slide, please. So going back to what we heard in June, again, simplify, calm, the application of materials and material palette. Like I said, we removed the material completely. We completely repainted the buildings with the materials. This is the previous elevation. Down below, our base was very separated, which the base being the bottom two layers was very separated from the language of the top four layers with the units. And we looked at how can we make that better, more cohesive, kind of blending and melding them together, create more interesting roof lines, and develop a singular design logic for how we apply the materials to the building. And then again, have some material samples that we can pass out. Next slide. So here's one of, it's building one, like Caitlin showed. And we're looking at, again, the base material now extends up into the unit levels. We started to look at how to add vertical elements to bring the eye up and connect the stepping in and out of the unit levels above and relating that all the way to the ground level. Those vertical elements in turn to change the material layout at the podium. We extended the loggia-like element over the gym in this particular building, just to extend that horizontal and help divide up the base on this building. And then we looked at refining our material palette. While the gray stone and block that's shown here really has a lot of aggregate, which again, inspired by the riverbed and different stones and sediments in there, which the material sample will show. And then an updated roof line. Next slide, we can kind of just go through some of the renderings that you saw previously, but from last June, I think the renderings and some of the perspective, or the renderings and some of the axons that we saw in the diagrams show the undulations of the building. They are quite large, so we really tried to carve into the mass to help bring the scale down. And we think adding a little more human scale to some of those elements at the parking garage levels also helps create just a better experience if you're a person walking through this site. Next slide. We intend to have our plaza just down the view in this, connect to the Greenbelt, really pull people in a safe fashion, let people re-engage in the Greenbelt when they leave our site. The plaza between buildings 1 and 2 is intended to be public. It'll have leasable space on each 1 and 2 on either side of the plaza. and should provide a nice moment for people to pause on their journey up and down the Greenbelt. Next slide. This starts to show then the building 2 from the trestle bridge, the pedestrian bridge, former railroad bridge. And some of our roof angles that also come up were inspired by some of the angles of the trestle structure, in addition to inspiration from the river flowing. Next slide. Looking back towards downtown, again, adjusting the materials and the tones of some of the materials in the roof lines. And this is kind of more of an experiential view of that rendering, or of that plaza with the Greenbelt in the distance. Next slide. And bird's eye that shows up much darker on this than my screen, but you know, we're on the river, we're close to downtown. It's a place for people to live and go out from and come back to. And it's a place that we envision the general public on the Greenbelt can get to quite easily and enjoy a area that is currently just dirt parking lot essentially. And that's it for me.
Good. Thank you. Questions for the applicant from commission at this point? Not at the moment. Okay. Is there a representative from the Downtown Boise Neighborhood Association? Seeing none. Is there any member of the public that wishes to testify on this item here tonight? Seeing none in person. Any online, Josh? None online, Josh? Okay. Anything else anybody wants to Well, if there's nothing else, we'll close the public portion of the testimony and bring it back to the commission for discussion and a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Stead.
I think this is I think they've more or less done what we've asked of them. And I think that, you know, there's always room for difference of taste. But I think that in, you know, an objective assessment of the things that we've requested, I think that the applicant has complied with that. And I do think it's a better project for it. I appreciate the increased cohesion with the roof lines. I think that those read a lot better. It's kind of created this feeling of a neighborhood and a more, you know, organically grown scale, without making it feel like I don't know. I've kind of lost my train of thought. I guess what I'm saying is I like it more. And I think that you guys have executed on what was requested of you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stead. Other commission members' comments? If not, is anybody willing to take a stab at a motion? I think I'd agree with Mr. Stead's comments and appreciate the effort brought forth. And any other concerns? Seems like we have support.
Mr. Chair, do we want to pass the materials around at all? Or?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, well, there's some. Let's take a quick look at the materials before. Sure, I think on the end would be great.
Stucco kind of a medium texture. We're not using black, dark bronze metal for our roof edges, guardrails, all metal. That's not the box green, which is kind of like the sage. And then this starts to show the aggregate exposed in the block that we're proposing to use. And those are the main materials that we have.
Any questions, comments on the samples? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Boyle.
I move to approve, well, are you ready for a motion?
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I move to approve item DRH 24-00118, subject to the findings of fact, conditions of approval, and conclusions of law.
Okay, so moved
Second?
and seconded. Thank you very much, Mr. Stead. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Christina, will you please call the roll?
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Erstad,
Aye.
Bull,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Great. Thank you very much. Next item is item number 4. It's DRH 24-00250. Location is 1095 South Federal Way. And at this time, I'd turn it over to Rachel for presentation, staff presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Rachel Farrell, Design Review Planner for the City of Boise, and before you is DRH 24-00250. Project is located at 1095 South Federal Way on the approximately 2.31 acre site, which would encompass these parcels shown here at the intersection of Kootenai Street and Federal Way. The applicant is proposing to construct a 4 to 5 story mixed-use building with 194 residential units consisting of studios, 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms on top of a two-story structured parking. And on the first floor of the structured parking, this will be subterranean. So the building will consist of 10,000 square feet of lobby and indoor amenity space, 18,000 square feet of outdoor amenity space, and approximately 2,000 square feet of commercial space. They are proposing 323 parking spaces, which includes EV parking and a total of 246 long-term bicycle parking spaces for the residents. Vehicle access to the structured parking and the building will be located off Pico Street, and a right-in, right-out only will be taken from Federal Way. The city design team reviewed the elevations and the renderings initially submitted and recommended that the applicant further develop the building facades and the application of materials to better define the primary elements and scale for a more pedestrian-friendly environment. And on September 9th, the applicant submitted new elevations and renderings to the city. So staff will defer to the applicant team to present those changes on the design concept to the commission. So in closing, city staff reviewed the changes and found that the updates to the elevations and the projects meet the intent of the design policies and recommends approval of DRH 24-00250 with the conditions included in the staff report, but with the recommendation to strike site-specific condition 1I related to building design. So I'll stand for any questions, and then the applicant is here to provide a presentation and an overview of those design changes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Questions for staff and the commission at this point? Seeing none. Thank you very much. The applicant like to come forward, and if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ethan Mansfield, representing Hawkins Companies, 855 West Broad Street, Boise, Idaho, 83702. All right. So as Rachel mentioned, first of all, I'm really excited about this project. I think it's an awesome location, and I think I'm pretty proud of the design that Brian and the team put together. So I'm just going to introduce the project really quickly, and then I'll have Brian come up and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the design changes, what staff had recommended, and how we address those. So the project is located on the northwestern corner of Federal Way and Kootenai. I think you're probably all familiar with the location. It's pretty prominent up on the hill there. As Rachel mentioned, it's 2.3 acres. This is in the MX3 zone. The MX3 zone allows for 70-foot height and allows residential and commercial uses by right. Importantly, I think as we get into some of the discussion later on, this entire kind of triangle here, including the single family, and actually there's a little bit of multifamily across the street as well. The smaller homes over here and this commercial center are all zoned MX3. So the envisionment for that is, frankly, I think near what we are providing. You shot me down, Rachel. Awesome, thanks. Oh, no worries at all. So here's a little bit of context for what we're providing, or we're proposing here. We're proposing a 5-story building along Federal Way and Kootenai with predominantly a maximum height of 59 feet. You can see that the stairway element, and I think it's just a stairway there, is 64 feet. And that's kind of, marking kind of the vehicular entrance to the parking garage. This is a long facade, so we wanted to kind of call out like, hey guys, here's your right turn. And that's the 64-foot element. On the Pico Street side, we actually dropped it down 1 story to 48 feet. And that was, of course, in part to kind of facilitate that transition to a lower intensity use. Again, there's no, there are transition standards in the MX3 zone. Those don't apply here because everything is MX3 and there's a public street separating this project from the homes to the west. So that's something just to consider. Another thing to consider is this design was brought forward from not the particular facade elements, but the height of the structure and the general form of the structure was brought forward from an earlier approval under the old zoning code where we requested a 64-foot height and a 40 or 49-foot height on the Pico Street side. So importantly, we kind of honored that existing approval as far as heights go. We did not want to take the extra story to go up to 70 feet, even though, by right we could have. As Rachel mentioned, we have a right in, right out on and off of Federal Way. I'm pretty proud of how this site is accessed, honestly, because it involves only minimal, kind of intrusion into the neighborhood, if you will, on Pico. One entrance is on Pico, one entrance is on Federal Way, and then the entire project is kind of accessed off of that via an internal drive aisle, so as to kind of minimize the traffic going to and from Pico Street. This shows kind of the pedestrian connectivity. We're proposing 10-foot sidewalks along Federal Way and Kootenai, detached per the new streetscape standards in the MX3 zone. And then on Pico, it's a detached 5-foot sidewalk. You can also see kind of the primary pedestrian accesses pointed out with those little stars. Those are like the public pedestrian accesses, not, there's obviously many more doors and access to amenities throughout the project. It does exceed, I think we have 69% street activation, which is pretty neat considering that the entire thing is circled by public streets. It's not like 2 or 3 sides like your standard, like most lots, I should say. And then here are, importantly, oh, they're shutting me down again. Or at least I can't see my screen, but I'll just talk off it. Can you guys all see okay? Great. So importantly, off of Pico Street, you can see that, I'll go back here, you can see that on the Pico Street elevations, we actually are accessing the units from the street so as to provide a more kind of pedestrian-oriented, street-oriented experience on Pico. So there's no, there is an access from the garage in the back to each of those units, but there's also a front door, just like a townhome. So we wanted to provide that townhome style vibe along Pico Street. And I think it will add a lot to, maintaining that pedestrian orientation along Pico. And with that, I'll let Brian with Cushing Terrell Architects take over and talk a little bit about kind of the design language and the motif that we've selected for this project.
Yep, thanks, Ethan. Brian, if you would state your name and address for the record.
Absolutely. My name is Brian Hallowell with Cushing Terrell Architects, 800 West Main Street, Suite 800. Again, thank you for hearing us present this project we're excited about. I really appreciate the time we get in front of you, and I'm excited to share this with you. So as Ethan just shared with you that the project in its location, would you mind taking a step back to the vicinity plan, please? Oh, I can do that here.
You got all the power right
Great.
there.
Just point it this way.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
Now you're good.
Okay, so I'd like to take a real quick walkthrough on the site location. Ethan covered it fairly well, and an important aspect of this project that I want to highlight is on the Pico side to the west, there are single family residences that are currently 1 story, and those are currently have been under the zoning code assigned an MX3, and to the northeast side of that is Federal Way. And Federal Way, in a sense, typologically feels like a freeway, to be honest with you. And from a pedestrian sense, there is not a lot of connectivity from one end of Federal Way to the other end. And so we were looking at that, and when we developed the project, I might be going to, just bear with me here. When we developed the project, we tried to address and activate that street as much as we possibly could with the amenities of the building and presenting those to Federal Way. But the important factor is from a design language and its place in the community, it felt like it had a strong prominence on the edge of the bench, the bench there that flanks all of Federal Way with that freeway. And then up at Protest Hill, as you're approaching the building and entering the smaller community into Kootenai, we felt like it had a strong capability of having a sort of a gateway landmark standpoint. And when presented with an opportunity at a site like this, feel a strong responsibility to do it with our best effort, and looking for something that we felt like would have some timelessness to it, we decided to look towards nature. And with that, some of the things that come to memory are the Black Cliffs out towards Lucky Peak along Highway 21. We mentioned that in our letter of our narrative about the design, but those are just sort of a striking aspect of the project that we feel like when we are looking at the parameters of a project that make it successful from a development standpoint, where you have balconies and windows of certain scale that is economical, but also provides daylight for the units. There's organization and order that has to occur with those. And for this particular project, the types of windows that we have are black vinyl windows, and just by the nature of the economics of it. And then we have balconies that are looking out. And so there's a certain scale to those where we quickly landed on, after visiting with in our interdepartmental review with design review and some of the guidance that they gave us, that we needed to treat the design with a little bit more of an intent. And that's where we really felt that there was a strong possibility to tie together the tones, the shapes, the scale, and the textures to an inspirational source such as the Black Cliffs, given all those criteria. So in here, you can see examples where the tones don't match exactly, and that's not the intent, but it's meant to be inspired by. And so on the base of the building, we have lighter materials that evoke the grassy hillside of the Black Cliffs, and we have a smaller texture and granularity. So we're utilizing some masonry at the first level. Again, the parking is 2 decks. 1 deck is subterranean, so you only see 1 level of parking. In effect, it's 4/2, but the 1 is subterranean. And And then we have other materials that you'll see. There are fiber cement panels, which are large scale fiber cement panels, but they give us the freedom to provide fissures in those panels and seams that evoke in some way, form, or fashion an organic or geologic type of sensibility to it. And then we also have, those are the darker gray, those are the lighter gray panels. And then we have the darker gray, which is a lap siding of varying widths. So it's not a very consistent 8-inch face or 6-inch face of fiber cement siding, but it's varying from 4 inches to 8 inches or 6 inches from fiber cement manufacturer. This is that corner at the top of Protest Hill. And so we have that amenity space on the first floor with a ramp and stairs leading into that glazed amenity space. It's lifted up. And then we have some perforated metal panel balconies at select locations where they make the most, they serve to be the most effective for the cost, where they highlight the corners and the main features. So in the center of this image here, we have those perforated metal panels with a geometric pattern that we feel evokes the facets of the geometric basalt columns. And then the windows, let's see here. The windows and some of those lighter elements just beyond to the right are staggered in a way that also we feel like accomplishes that. For a sense of warmth, we've included spandrels in between the windows, which are thermally modified lap siding, so like a natural wood material. And then over there in the distance, that highlight feature with the elevated stair tower that Ethan mentioned before, which serves a couple functions of establishing a strong identity for the building, but also helps establish a symbiology or a marker for where to enter the parking when you're driving down Federal Way. So that's right to the behind that is the access to the access drive in between the buildings. Regarding the access drive, I'd like to highlight also that we've located all the solid waste services and access inside the access drive. So solid waste vehicles would enter the access drive. And if you'd like to see that, I can go back to that just right. Yeah, so right in the center here, this is Federal Way on the north, and that's right in, right out. When you go around the south, there's Pico, and then there's solid waste, our solid waste room right there, solid waste room right there, and the solid waste room on the other side serving the other half of the development. And so those are all designed, and we've met with Gabe to work this out to allow access, free access for the vehicle to get through and pass through the site. So that what that does in effect for this building that is a 360-degree building where all faces are public, it brings the solid waste access and containment and removal into that access drive in the middle there. Along Pico, we have, this is the corner of along Kootenai to the right outside of view, but Pico, which is the street that is has a residential, the residence is on the left-hand side there. We are varying the scale and we're treating the street edge with a sort of a brownstone type of stoop feature where the entrances to those units at the grade level have steps down and a little patio outside of their living space that accesses that separated sidewalk from the roadway. We've also varied the height of the balconies. Our initial pass just brazenly took all the balconies up to the top, and we got really good feedback from Rachel and the design review staff, encouraging us to relook at that. And what we decided was perhaps the scale of that needs to be brought down or varied in such a way. So we kept the elevated balconies on the edges, and then in between we're lowering the balconies so they're Juliet's above the first floor, and we're bringing down the roof line. So the attempt is to draw the eye down and provide variety and help identify visually where the endpoints are and where some just creating a little bit of a variety along there. We've also established a little bit more of a consistency with the base material here. We did have a couple different materials staggering behind there. It felt a little too busy when we took another look at it, but I feel like this is calmed down a bit and it feels a little more comfortable. This is the north amenity space, the northwest amenity space, where Pico is over to the right. Federal Way is in the distance behind the corner over here. We have a rooftop amenity limited to 735 square feet for the one entrance and exit that we have, the one egress capacity. Just by the configuration, we can only have 50 occupants up there. And so we have this amenity space with some glazing, a ramp back in here, and then some steps up to this. This is more or less intended to be offices and just general amenities. It's not absolutely defined at this point, but that's what it's affording. This is the other view along Federal Way of that same amenity space, and you can see in the foreground here this lap siding material with the varying widths of that lap siding to help give it some of that organic sensibility. There's just a random assortment of the widths of the lap siding that's not too regular feeling from that standpoint. And then some more of the metal panels for the perforated metal panels for the balconies. And then the balconies become a standard fabricated metal as they go on the balance of the main facade. So you can see that there's this base material, this darker gray, and then we have the basalt column type of sensibility for these outcroppings where the balconies are inset in between those. And then, but the balconies are also sort of creating a dynamic with the facade where they are pushing out just a little bit to present themselves to the street with some dynamic facade treatment. At the base level, we have a continuation of the masonry and apertures for the parking garage and for the ventilation. And the masonry has that more granular feel to it. The masonry also has a light and a dark scheme to it. So again, this is the old version and the new version. This is what we presented originally, and we had the stair pulled back, and we had a facade element. At that time, we felt like it was great to maybe bind the building together with that bridge because we don't really have the ability to have these columnar features reach the ground. So that was the decision that sort of led us to go this way, and with that original scheme. And then with this new scheme, we revisited that. We pulled the stair out, reduced the eyebrow element, and really doubled down on these vertical elements, where on this central element, we decided to give it more prominence if it was pulled forward, and if we gave it a complementary material. And with that material right now, we're looking at using a Core 10 standing seam metal paneling that goes from the ground level all the way up to the top of the parapet. What we're also showing is a sloping of that to further the theme of the slope on the tops of these outcroppings. And then you can see again the granularity at the ground level, and then the staggering of the windows for interest and organic sensibility, and then the baseline material in the background. And then again, here's the old. There was some comments from design massing along Federal Way, and so we just generally took an overall look at it, and we revised some of the apertures in the facade, and settled down this exit stair out of this amenity space. Am I running out of time?
And we've just got about a minute and I think we'll just wrap up and make some concluding.
You bet. Okay, and I think that's all we have for the design language, actually. So appreciate your time. Thanks, Ethan.
Sorry about that, Brian. I just want to have enough time to just conclude here. So this pedestrian scale and warmth, it was another recommendation that Rachel provided us on Pico Street. So we did modify a few elements of the proposal. Specifically, we removed balconies to give the facade kind of a varied appearance. So it wasn't just like giant monolithic balconies going up. It had some interest, some visual interest, so that you weren't just looking up. That's kind of a closing shot. I think that really kind of portrays what the intent we were trying to get on Pico Street. And in sum, we're simply asking to to kind of look at staff's recommendation and approve DRH 24-250 and remove condition 1I from the conditions of approval as we appeared to meet the intent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions from the commission for the applicant this time? Great, thank you very much. Is there a member of the neighborhood association representative here tonight that is here to testify? A public, okay. Yeah, we've got one sign up first from the public side. That's Victoria Purdy. Yeah, if you would please come forward. If you wouldn't mind just stating your name and address and.
Hi.
Hi.
Victoria Purdy, 1011 Pico Street, Boise, Idaho, 83705. About 3 years ago, I bought Pico Street house to retire in before they changed the zoning. It's a really, as Ethan said, it's a beautiful place to live, a nice area. Problem with having 5 stories in front of us, that's where the sun comes in. Sun sets behind us. The front of our homes will never see any sunshine. If it snows, if there's freezing rain, it's going to be an ice skating rink. I can't even imagine how many accidents there's going to be with cars sliding all over, trying to get to and from. It's just way too high. 2 stories would still allow some sunshine. But I don't think there's been a light study. I don't believe there's been a traffic study, which I'm very concerned about. Plus having that many people across the street. I'm pretty sure that they're going to be in front of my house all the time because that's where the multi-purpose area is. And I think it's your office building, right? You're moving your headquarters there? No. You're not? Oh, what I thought you said. Anyway, that's about it. It's just, I really think that the traffic study and the light study needs to be done. It'll be freezing in the wintertime in front of my home.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other members of the public wishing to testify? Yes, ma'am, if you would please come forward. Again, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Karen Moore, and I live at 1007 South Pico Street. And I did submit written testimony opposing the current design, although I do want to say it's a beautiful design, and I do appreciate the thoughtfulness. I just think that the density of that design is really incompatible with our neighborhood. We are 5 single-story homes that are about 900 square feet. And in my written testimony, I was trying to point out with my kind of basic pictures how narrow that street is right now. The front of my house is just 20 feet from the road. The road currently is only 30 feet wide, and I know there's some plan to widen it a little bit, but even adding the sidewalk and the landscaping, I'll be about 65 feet from the face of the building. And it's 4-story on my side, but in effect, 5-story. And honestly, where I'm located, I'm across from the amenities building. So I'm the amenities part. So I'm in, I don't have quite as much height in front of me. But I think something that's more like a 3-story building, or maybe the townhomes would be more consistent and compatible. On the land use map that was included with the materials, they pointed out high density over at the intersection of Kootenai and Columbus. And that's really the Columbus Square apartments. There's only 16 units there. And the lower level is garden, and then there's a level on top. And then at the north side of that intersection, there's 16 condominiums and those are 3 stories. So yes, it's more dense than single family homes, but it isn't really the kind of density we're talking about with this project. At the neighborhood meeting back in May, Ethan was saying that this wasn't intended to be affordable housing and that they were really going for the tech workers and empty nesters. But honestly, with all of the bike racks we've got going in there, I think it's kind of maybe turned into more of a student housing project potentially.
That's not the intent.
Okay, because there's quite a few studios in there, and I know there's 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, but I feel like this is very similar to the project, although with the edits that, you know, you've made and that Rachel had suggested actually is a little bit better than the project, the student housing project down at 818 West and Morrison. So it looks very similar to that, but if you look at that project, that is a 4-lane street there, not the 1-lane residential street that we're on. So while I do appreciate the design and I understand that you have the ability to do to the max there, I don't think you should because of the existing residents and the character of the neighborhood.
Thank you very much. There are other members of the public wishing to testify? Yes. And if you would, please state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, my name is Hannah Kronbaugh. My address is 44 South Mesa Vista Drive, Boise, Idaho. I agree with what my predecessors said, but I'd like to back up. So when you look up Capitol Street from downtown and you're looking towards the bench, what you expect to see is you expect to see the train depot and a bunch of trees. Usually this is intermingled with a lot of single family homes. My concern is that if this project is approved, that this is going to overshadow what the train depot brings to the bench area. Like everyone else has kind of said up to this point, I also agree that I would like to see this project not like dissolved necessarily, but to bring it down to 3 stories. My concern is also for traffic that is on Federal Way and the lack of preparation that there is in that, as well as on Kootenai. It already, like today when I was leaving at like 2 p.m., which is not a heavy traffic time, there was backups onto protests and even onto Federal Way of people not being able to get onto Kootenai. And so to have even more like 200 or 194 other people is a lot to add to that area. As well as the light timing, it is really not ideal on the intersection for Federal Way and Kootenai. And then to add more traffic and more feeding into that light would be a lot. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Anna. Other members of the public wishing to testify tonight? Seeing none in the audience at the moment. Any online? Okay, Josh. And when ready, please state your name and address for the record when you're online, when able.
Yeah, my name is Alexandra Mandjar. I live at 2222 West Kootenai Street. Pretty close to this project actually, and I just want to say that I really appreciate the developer's attention to this site and appreciate how they've hidden the parking on basically all of the street frontages and the trash services. I think that they've given a really extra thoughtful approach to Pico Street and the Kootenai frontage. And I would love to see, you know, that additional housing in my neighborhood. I think it's really high demand area. The pricing has increased rapidly, and having these more attainable options for people close to downtown where it's very easy to bike or even walk to downtown to work. This is an excellent location for housing. I think the density is appropriate. And I also really appreciate the right in, right out. I think that will help a lot with the traffic that we experience in this neighborhood. And honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing more traffic on Kootenai just because a lot of people use that as a cut through and there's a lot of capacity on Orchard. And I think if people start to experience backups on Kootenai, they'll use that higher level arterial and it might even calm down the street a bit. So I really appreciate the design here and hope that the commission approves it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody else online? Okay, got another online. Again, please state your name and address when you're able.
Hi, can you hear me? It's Laura Robinson.
I roll it, Laura.
Okay, I bought my home. I live at a 1019 Pico Street. I bought it back in 2017. And I've also been a licensed realtor in Idaho since 2014. So since living on that street, I've just, my biggest concern is going to be the traffic. I understand that a proposal has already been approved for 104 units, and Hawkins is now requesting 90 more units. So my biggest concern is just if there has been a new traffic study done for this additional proposed project. I'm just very concerned with no lights, and all you have are the stop signs at Pico and Kootenai and Pico and Federal. And I just think that with the railroad and not having any kind of safety arm there as it is, just with our little street and just seeing the traffic, since that is a main thoroughway that goes down towards Prospect from Vista, I'm just super concerned with the railroad there too, and there not being a safety arm. So my biggest request would be for the commission to consider doing additional traffic management study and also some sort of railroad safety study before approving this project.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else online? One more, okay. Again, please state your name and address when you're able.
Hi, my name is Fatima Partida. My address is 1827 West Boise Ave, which is down the hill from this project. I was gonna say, like, regarding the traffic, there is a bus route that is bus 29, and I know that residents living there will use it. I take that bus to downtown. It takes about 7 minutes to get to downtown. So I think that's a reliable way to get to work for most people. And I think that the housing is needed in this area. So I recommend approval for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others online? One more time in the audience, anybody else want to testify tonight? Seeing none, I'll turn it back. Yes, ma'am. If you would please come forward. Yeah, come on forward. Thanks. And if you would state your name and address for the record.
Kim Binder, 1101 Pico Street.
Okay.
And I'm also a resident on that little street. I am also concerned about the height and traffic. Right now, the street isn't even wide enough to park on both sides and get a fire truck through, and we have had a fire there before. So that concerns me, that I can even get out of my driveway if they don't make it wider. And the traffic, because we already have cars cutting off, not going to the Signal Federal Way and cutting off through Pico to make up some time. So that's a concern. And parking. There's not going to be enough parking for the amount of people that are in that unit. And then there'll be parking on the streets. So those also are concerns that I have, along with my neighbors.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of the public here tonight? Seeing none, I'll turn back over to the applicant to respond to any comments thus far.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commissioners. I think these are very reasonable and real comments that are important to think about. I think also importantly to remember, and I think everyone here understands this, is that this height is actually well below what is allowed in the zone. And so, and this is a part of, I think, the city of Boise's mission that was kind of pushed very hard when the modern zoning code was adopted. And that is to create dense housing opportunities, not only additional types of housing in other areas of the city outside of the downtown core, but also increased density of housing to make those transit investments like Route, I think Fatima said it was Route 29, but the route that goes near, on Federal Way and Kootenai past the site. That's how our investments in transit pay off, is when there's enough ridership to actually, fill a bus. So this is what this project is attempting to kind of fulfill. Those are the goals that it's trying to meet at the City of Boise's Blueprint Boise Comprehensive Plan. I'd like to also make it really clear, these are not rented by room. This is not intended to be a student housing project. It is quite close to Boise State. I would absolutely put money on the fact that some students will be living there. I can also imagine Micron workers living there, since the Federal Way bike path goes straight to Micron. I can also imagine downtown workers living there. And I can also imagine folks who are trying to downsize, sell their home, and potentially live in a highly amenitized apartment complex near downtown, living in our complex. So it caters to a number of different resident typologies, I should say. And then, regarding the street width on Pico, one of the benefits of this project, I think, to the community is that we are actually creating a standard street on one side. So, on the side that we control, I should say. So it will be a 33-foot wide street. That's a requirement of ACHD as well as the fire department to access the site. We did work through all of this site plan and receive comments from the fire department. I specifically asked if, that access drive through the middle needed to accommodate fire trucks, and they have adequate aerial access from the outside of the site. We confirmed that. And I think too, regarding transportation improvements in the area, we'll be paying about $330,000 in impact fees on this project to ACHD specifically. So if there's any ACHD representatives, I would encourage ACHD to take a look at that particular neighborhood to see if there's potential reinvestment of our impact fee dollars into that neighborhood specifically to address some of the concerns if it is warranted. That's what those impact fees are there for. It's not awesome that we develop projects here and our impact fees go out to widen roads on the outskirts of town, from a urban planning perspective. So anyway, I think that's all I've got, and I really thank you for your time. I also want to thank Rachel for her great work and productive comments on our plan. So thank you very much.
Great. There are questions for the applicant from the commission. Do you know if any shade studies were conducted on the building?
Chairman Marsh, we did not conduct a shade study.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Mr.
I did have one question actually, and that was what is the number of guest parking stalls that you guys probably are required to have, but are including?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Erstad, that is a fantastic question. Thanks, Rachel. Is it possible for you? Oh, actually, I can probably get to it right here. I have all the data right here. So there are actually many more vehicle spaces than the minimum required per code. We're providing, the requirement is to provide 19 guest parking spaces. We have a total of 233 spaces. We're providing a total of 323 spaces. And it's great because, we heard the neighborhood, they're concerned about parking. We're also concerned about our residents negatively impacting the surrounding neighborhood. So as the city kind of wants a certain amount of parking and the neighbors want more than that, we struck a balance and provided somewhere in the middle.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Well, we'll close the public portion of the testimony, bring back to the commission for discussion and possibly a motion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Ball.
Well, first I want to acknowledge the neighbors for showing up and providing testimony. I do agree, like this is this is a pretty big adjustment for you. I think it's quite jarring to have such a large building going right next to single family homes. That being said, you know, the underlying zone allows for this, both the height and the use. So it's, you know, it's not a zoning issue. This commission can't opine on the zone. We're here to talk about design. So that being said, I also want to acknowledge Hawkins. You know, they're a longtime developer in this community. I think they do great work, and I trust that they're going to do the right thing here, because as they said, you know, this is a very highly visible site. You know, you're going to be able to see this from, you know, down on Boise Ave and a lot of different locations. So that being said, getting to the actual design, the design of this building makes me want to throw myself off of the Black Cliffs. I think it's, you know, if we're talking about timeless design, this is not timeless in my opinion. I think you know, it's got low quality materials on the facade. I think the facade is extremely busy with balconies and these columnar elements. I don't care for kind of the slanted, you know, roof lines above the column elements. So for me, for such like a prominent building, I think we've really got to kind of scrutinize this a bit more. I think my desire would be to see it just kind of simplified, you know, higher quality materials. I also just think we have to consider like the facade length on Federal Way is quite long. And so, yeah, right now it's, you know, I don't know if it's feasible, but it'd be great if you could somehow kind of break that facade, potentially at that stair tower, or where the garage entry is. But yeah, in my opinion, I think this needs a lot of work.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bull. What are thoughts, comments on the commission side?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Can we see the Federal Way elevation, the revised one?
There you go.
Rachel, do you want to blow that up so it's a little larger on the screen? And then I can navigate to that.
Do you want a perspective of the
let's-
flat elevation?
It would have been nice to have the color renderings flat and not the perspective.
I think it's.
We have elevations. Rich, we actually have elevations within our presentation if you'd like to look at it, or that works as well.
Yeah.
I do have a couple comments. I like the intent and trying to pull from nature for this, but I have a couple concerns on the Federal Way elevation. And I'll use this word that it feels like at the pedestrian level, there's a lot of blank walls. And I think that could be resolved. Maybe it's just the architectural treatments on it. But again, try not to clutter or make it too busy. And maybe that's pulling from the material from the railings or something and doing something architectural on those blank walls. Also, I'm not excited about the columns at I think it's the entry, the brick column. It just seems, I I think the architects on this commission can maybe help me with the right language, but too much, too heavy, I don't know. Maybe it's a different material that you already have in your palette there instead of the brick. But I just have concern with the pedestrian level on Federal Way. It's going to be, again, highly visible, a lot of traffic. We want to encourage the pedestrian activity there. And I guess I would like to see some modifications there, some other type of treatments, and maybe it's a different material. Again, maybe it's an architectural feature on the existing material, but I think just something different needs to happen at the pedestrian level along Federal Way. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Other comments, Commissioner?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Stead.
I agree with Commissioner Aguilar. I think that a lot of these podium projects suffer from a very hostile pedestrian level around the parking, particularly in a place where we, you know, on one side you've got a 40 mile an hour speed limit that typically gets pushed towards 50. And then on the other side, there's you know, not a whole lot to interact with. So, you know, at the very least, a more articulated building envelope there that allows to feel like your pedestrian progression down the street is not just a 100-yard sprint. I think that would certainly be beneficial. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the brick being problematic. I think maybe you know, there's this beige tan brick in some areas, and it kind of looks like a red brick in others. I think maybe picking one or the other might help, or maybe tying the second color more to that the darker facade. I'm not opposed to the slant on the roofs, but on the parapets. I think, you know, if anything, I would probably push that a little bit harder and kind of commit to the theme a little bit. I agree that materiality, you know, it's just a whole lot of fiber cement. You know, projects are made or broken on their budgets, but if this is even an intermediate hold, I just foresee a whole lot of maintenance issues coming up if you're going to skimp out on the cladding. So, you know, maybe bring more of that masonry up into the upper floors, or, you know, look at more of a metallic cladding in other areas. You know, I appreciate the Core 10 look on the stair tower here. I don't know why it didn't get translated to the Pico side. I think you know, I really like the progress that was made between the two iterations, but I, you know, want to see it come together a little more. I think to Commissioner Bull's point about the busyness of this facade, it could certainly do with kind of a, you know, a condensing. If these bump outs were not, you know, 10 feet wide, but 30 feet wide, and, you know, you still maintain a sort of a rhythm, and it's a little bit more impactful with each one. At some point, it's kind of a matter of taste. I think we always need to recognize that. But I don't think that Commissioner Bull is entirely wrong either. There's a lot going on here, and at any scale, you know, the pedestrian scale, the vehicular scale, the regional scale, I think there's just a lot that needs to be kind of refined, condensed, and given a little bit extra thought. Yeah, I'll step away from the mic for a second and let someone else jump in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stad. Other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Bull.
Yeah, just trying to provide a little bit more constructive feedback. I think I don't know what the program requires, but just looking at again this facade, I don't know if you have to have a balcony for every single unit, but potentially reducing the amount of balconies, maybe making the windows a little bit bigger, and then simplifying the materials, I think, and just like I think it needs to feel a little bit more cohesive.
Yeah, I think it's a little challenging. I think that facade's close to 475 feet in length. Maybe some of the busyness is because it's such a repetition of the same piece for that length, that there's a way to break up those into like two separate masses a little bit by potentially offsetting a portion of the center towards the center. I know it kind of pushes into the courtyard piece, but as we look at that's a very long facade that's very flat from a distance. One of the things I think I do appreciate though, and I know that by putting the effort towards the Pico side of the walk-up units, I'd certainly rather have the ground, the dedication to some additional articulation and relationship to the community off of Pico rather than Federal Way. But I do agree that there's probably some more opportunities along Federal Way. So I'm not as concerned about the Federal Way portion. Again, I think this has the same piece on the Pico side. If there was a way to push back maybe the top two levels, a little offset from the lower ones, the height of the building from next door might feel a little bit more to scale. But yeah, it's always a challenge on the infill projects where they're against some adjacent uses like that. I think we're going to continue to have some of these challenges. Overall, I do appreciate what they tried to do with scale and the streetscape on Pico. So I like the project. I think there are some pieces that need to be addressed. I wish we had some more of these views prior to this meeting. It makes it a little easier for us to review and react to it rather than at the last minute kind of seeing some of these different options. Some of my personal comments. Dana, I didn't know if you had anything. I think you're the only one that you want to add. So at this point, I think we all kind of feel that this is a good use of that space. It's a great location. It just could use a little bit more attention. Anybody want to take a stab at a motion? Is there any additional comments they want to provide the applicant?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Sped.
I think before making a motion, I'd like to understand what the consensus on the commission is for a next step. Is this a work session style next step, or is this a deferral a la the last project case? I don't think it's an outright denial. I mean, our differences with this are kind of a design refinement level, not necessarily, obviously we can't deny it on use. That's a planning and zoning question. It's the form-based code. We're well within the requirements there. I think it's really just a matter of, what we think the appropriate next step is for this.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Segula.
Commissioner Erstad. I believe on one of the slides, the applicant was, if you pull up the site-specific conditions, the applicant was requesting to remove item I. And I am not in agreement with that. I think that condition needs to stay. And if you don't have, I don't know if you can pull up those conditions or that specific item, but I think that item covers what we're looking for in terms of the facades needing to be further developed and then coming back to a public design review work session with changes. I don't know if anything else needs to be added to that per se.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Mr. Chair, I would agree that Commissioner Aguilar has hit the nail on the head. I think this has not been adequately addressed yet, and so it's worth keeping in.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that I really like that there's only one roof line to this building, which people don't seem to do around here, and I think we could use more of that. That being said, the two different versions of this building pretty much look the same to me, and I'm not really struggling because our recently former planning director I can't remember if he said it in front of the group or I just heard him say this somewhere, that, you know, instead of asking people to tweak buildings, we often need to just start over, because when we ask for just a different material or to, you know, add fenestration or whatever it is, it usually comes out looking 90% the same and 10% slightly different, which is not necessarily 10% improved. And since it sounds like nobody on this commission is really excited about this building, I'm just not, I'm more confused than not about which way we go. But at the same time, you know, this isn't the downtown library. Like, it's a residential building on Federal Way, which needs to be good looking. And the city deserves that, as do the residents and all the neighbors. Yeah, I'm just sort of confused about what exactly we're expecting.
Yeah, I mean, kind of comment on that. I think there's some scale pieces that that were commented on, and I think the rest of the commissioners have provided some input for the applicants of some of the desired opportunities for change. I guess kind of coming back, we got a couple of different, you could approve the project and leave that condition in, which brings them back to a work session. If we're generally thinking that this is some minor tweaks and modifications to the plans that they can accomplish, or we can defer it to a work session as well. If we're not 100% that they're on the right track. Of course, you can deny it as well with. So I think that's kind of where we're at on this particular project.
Mr. Chair, if I could interject, I think to the point of, you know, going back to the square one, kind of on top of the comment that, you know, we need the housing, we need the more buildings kind of this scale, and having a, you know, simplified rather than a highly kind of varied and variegated form. I don't think that pushing all the way back to the square one is going to necessarily yield in any different project. You know, the shape is what the shape is for the lot. I think the developer and design team have done a good job of, scaling down as they get away from Federal Way. I'm still a little surprised that they're not taking their full 70 feet on Federal Way, where I don't think it would be very noticeable from the opposite side, that you're still outside of high-rise limitations. You can do 5/2, and you've got more than enough parking to do it within your garage. So that still is a surprise to me. Maybe the only difference would be, does part of your building on one side of the Federal Way access aisle, does that make sense to be 6 stories and then 5 stories and then 4 stories? Does it create a feel of, 2 more, not to say commonly scaled, but, scaled kind of more in line with the standard downtown lot size that we have here? It's not necessarily putting a whole bunch of stuff on this site, but it starts to break it down into a slightly more bite-sized chunks, while still maintaining that, it's a 450-foot long site. It's going to be a big building. We have to recognize that. I guess I haven't really come to a very good explanation of where we should go, or even, I don't know if I've even addressed Commissioner Zuckerman's comments very well, but I think that even if we were to say, no, start over, I think we're going to see a similar project. I think it's a matter of, what are the details? What are the materials? What are the formal movements, and are they, lots of unit size related movements that articulate on the exterior? Are they more kind of module sized articulations? Are they kind of broken up based on a building scale modulation? I think that's kind of what we need to give guidance on. And I think that could happen within the time span between now and a work session. But if we really want to be very selective and cautious with seeding our ability to rein this in, I would say it would be a deferral. Come back to a public hearing, and the requirement for a work session would still be in the conditions of approval at the next public hearing. Does that do enough to kind of make sure that we see a new product or a more refined product, while also keeping this kind of on the rails, not completely pulling this away from financing and all of those kind of structures?
Thank you, Merstad. I would agree that this could be a deferral to another work session. I'm not sure that's a pretty strong condition. That's pretty loose for a design review for an approval. So that would be my recommendation, is to defer to a work session and let them take into consideration the comments that we brought in tonight.
Mr. Chair, just
Yeah.
to clarify, when we go to a work session, that's typically with an approval. When we defer, it goes back to a public hearing, as we saw with the Trappers Island project.
Yeah, I think would defer to a workshop before work session prior to a hearing. Well, we could do an approval after that workshop. Can we, Josh, or?
Mr. Chair, let me clarify if I'm understanding you. You would propose deferring to a work session before the hearing at like 5 o'clock, like we usually do, and then hear it that same night, or like the next month?
Guess it depends on what you see that night.
Yeah, I guess I would concur with Commissioner Erstad in that the typical sequence of events would be what Rachel outlined in her initial staff report, which would be an approval tonight with a work session to follow to work on a refined design. If you feel that the project is close and with some comments, and I would just encourage the commission to provide very specific comments tonight about design. If you feel that the project is close enough tonight with some tweaks, it can get there. Provide those tonight with an approval and a work session to follow would be one path that we would typically see. The other path would be deferral to the next public hearing to see some more substantial design changes that you could then provide some direction on.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Does that clarify our paths forward? Personally, I'd like to see it move forward, but I think a couple of the commissioners have some more serious concerns than others that may warrant deferral to just another meeting to see some revised concepts.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Second.
I'm all for it moving forward, meaning to a work session or deferring it to a public hearing. I'm not as concerned about that as I am about what we're going to see next. And I would just say that the most important change that I'd like to see is in material choice, and that I don't know how we can approve a building that's primarily covered in stucco. Right, that it's sorry, thank you, fiber cement that looks to me like stucco, but in fiber cement, and I would like to ask for a better material choice. I think it would change the whole look and feel of the building.
Okay. That anybody want to take a stab at a motion?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Stead.
I would move to approve DRH 24-00250 in accordance with the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval, including item number 1I, moving this to a work session, and noting particularly materiality as a concern and pedestrian scale articulation at the ground plane along the Federal Way.
Okay, got a motion?
Second.
Seconded, thank you. Seconded. Any discussions on the motion at this point?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Ball.
I guess just how much are we concerned about this 450-foot facade, and should we add in there just a note about it doesn't have to be like a full break in the building, but either a step down or something that you can just somehow kind of break up visually that 450-foot length. So to me, that's like a key issue here. And that could either be, you could step down the roof, you could, step in the facade, but it just feels like something has to happen somewhere on that facade.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Stead.
My own personal instinct as a designer would be to unify some of those horizontal articulations into larger scale movements and bring them down to the ground plane so that every 50 feet or so there was an expression of a different depth to that facade, that met the ground and created you know, a more pedestrian friendly rhythm, and also provided for visual interest at the ground level. I wouldn't personally, you know, worry too much about parapet height or anything like that. I don't think that the pedestrian will understand that, or even the driver. That's a 500-foot away kind of thing that someone up against the building is not really going to experience. But I think that the way that the facade interacts with the ground level is significantly more important than roof heights.
Other questions, discussions on the motion? Well, with that, Christina, will you please call the roll?
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Erstad,
Aye.
Bull,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
That concludes our items for tonight. Thank you for everybody for attending, and we are adjourned.